Monday morning, 7:58. The conference room on the fourth floor of Pierce Automotive Components smelled like burnt coffee and damp metal. That smell clung to your clothes, your hands, your throat, the kind of scent that belonged to factories where fatigue was polished away with caffeine. Everyone sat in neat rows. Fluorescent lights bounced off a fine layer of dust, casting a haze over faces pretending to look refreshed for the week. I stayed still, my coffee trembling each time someone shifted a chair. Ethan Pierce walked in. No introduction, no pause for silence. He was the kind of man whose rooms obeyed by instinct. Dark gray suit, wine red tie, a perfect executive smile. Just warm enough to feel approachable, just smug enough to show he knew it. Behind him was Lena, 28, beige dress, soft curls, holding a folder that still smelled of fresh ink. I had seen the type before, a mix of bright perfume and brighter delusion about bringing a fresh perspective. Ethan started with his confident tone. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter for Pierce Automotive. We're promoting Lena Morrison to Regional Operations Director. The room froze. Then came the clapping, hesitant at first, mechanical by the end. I joined in because that's what you do when you don't want to be watched. The conference room smelled like burnt ambition and cheap perfume. Lena smiled a little too long, thanked everyone with a trembling voice, like reading from a script. Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder, too familiar for the workplace, too dangerous to question. Everyone knew. No one said it. Behind them, the slide read, Pierce 2030, faster, leaner, smarter. Familiar words, recycled from every cost-cutting campaign we'd ever had. Faster meant fewer inspections. Leaner meant fewer people to question orders. Smarter meant learning how to stay silent. Ethan's voice filled the room again, bright and hollow. Lena will lead our regional operations strategy. She's young, visionary, and understands modern data integration. I glanced at the metrics. She had been here 5 months. Before this, marketing for a fashion brand. Visionary. Right. In this world, having nice eyes was enough to make you visionary. The second round of applause hit. I felt the heat from the lights against my face. My coffee rippled to the beat of my pulse. Ethan's gaze swept the room and stopped on me. Lily, he said, make sure Lena's transition goes smoothly. We can't afford any delays. I nodded. Didn't speak. Just felt something tighten around my throat. We can't afford any delays. It sounded ordinary, but I heard the blade in it. 2 months ago, Ethan had forced me to optimize the brake inspection process from 12 steps down to 9. I had pushed back. He laughed. You're too careful, Lily. Cars don't need saints, they need speed. I had signed off, reluctantly, told myself it was just once. Now, no delays meant more corners to be cut. And I was still, supposed to smile. The meeting dragged on, hollow congratulations, pen clicks, chairs scraping, mugs tapping. The soundtrack of corporate decay. Ethan talked about efficiency. Lena stared at papers she probably couldn't explain. I checked the clock. 8:22. Only 20 minutes had passed. It felt like 7 years. When the meeting ended, people scattered like air escaping a vacuum. A few lingered, sweet as artificial sugar. You'll do great, Lena. So exciting to see new energy. I gathered my notes, slow and steady. As I passed, Lena smiled politely. You'll have to teach me all your secrets, Lily. They're all written in the manual, I said softly. She laughed, not realizing that was the joke. Ethan stood at the door and gestured for me to stay. The door shut. Silence thickened. Only the hum of the AC and the burnt smell of coffee remained. You've been with us, what? 7 years? 7. You've been invaluable, Lily. I mean it. None of this would be possible without your groundwork. I stayed quiet. When a man says invaluable, he usually means unpromotable. You understand the bigger picture, right? Which picture? The one where we stay competitive. You'll still lead quality control. Lena's role is more strategic. Strategic. A word he had drained of all meaning. Sure, I said, happy to help. He smiled, relieved. And I felt something clear in my mind, sharp and cold. The kind of clarity that comes at 3 in the morning when you finally understand what's been keeping you awake for years. I walked out, down the glass hallway overlooking the assembly line below. The clang of steel, the smell of oil, the hiss of machines. 7 years ago, I loved that sound. It made me believe I was building something safe, something that mattered. Now it just screamed warning. At my desk, I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, my reflection flickered across rows of files: Safety Test, Audit 2024, Compliance Report. In the corner, last edited by E. Pierce. My stomach sank. I opened the file. One data column was missing. Brake temperature testing at 400 degrees, a mandatory safety metric. I didn't need to guess who deleted it. I closed the file, didn't save, didn't react, just poured another cup of coffee, colder, more bitter than before. The coffee tasted like metal. Outside, Lena's heels clicked against the concrete floor, click, 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 like a countdown clock. I leaned back, breathing in the mix of heat, steel, and pretense. Somewhere in that room earlier, something had died. Not me, not the job, but the illusion that people like Ethan still knew what safety meant. And that was the moment I knew I wouldn't stay silent forever. 7 years ago, I walked through the gates of Pierce Automotive Components on a cold March morning, gray as steel. I had lost everything: my savings, my small apartment in Columbus, and the belief that I was a smart woman. The man I was supposed to marry disappeared with my account balance and the car I was still paying off. The police said there wasn't enough criminal evidence, and the bank still wanted its money on the first. I signed a contract as a quality control engineer for a salary that barely covered rent, but at least the work had principles, numbers, and something no one could fake: data. On my first day, I stood inside the brake testing bay. The clash of metal, the hiss of oil, the smell of burning rubber. Someone asked me, "Why this job?" I said, "Because it doesn't lie." 3 months later, I was moved to safety and compliance. Every morning, I reviewed hundreds of data lines: pressure, temperature, friction ratios, deviation margins. Every number I signed off on meant something: a life somewhere out there, on a highway, in the rain, in the final second before the brakes held. I never forgot the day my younger brother died. It was a wet afternoon in June. His sedan skidded across the divider because the brakes failed. The manufacturer blamed the weather conditions. A year later, they quietly recalled thousands of cars for defective brake assemblies imported from Mexico. No one on the board was charged. I was 26, and from that day on, every time I saw a car, I heard the sound of friction in my chest. At my first safety conference, a coworker joked, "Do you check every line yourself?" I smiled and lifted my cold coffee. That's why I check every line twice. Ethan Pierce was the one who interviewed me. Mid-30s, sharp, articulate, different from the usual kind of leadership. During the interview, he said, "Pierce builds cars that don't just move, they protect. Safety isn't a department here, it's a philosophy." That line hit me hard. I thought I had found the place to start over, and for the first few years, he actually believed it. Ethan toured the plant with me, asked about the details, and even signed off on a few reports himself. He told me, "You're the conscience of this factory." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a burden. Either way, from that day on, I lived like a silent gatekeeper. Time moved faster than the stamping machines. I didn't date, didn't go out. I learned to live in a small apartment, eat canned dinners, and pay my debts on time. People at the plant joked that I was married to the job. Maybe they were right. It was the only relationship that hadn't betrayed me, or so I thought. When Pierce expanded into Europe, Ethan became the golden boy of American manufacturing. The press photographed him on the new production floor, espresso in hand, saying all the right words: efficiency, innovation, future. And I was still in my gray uniform, bent over the tensile test machine, keeping every data line straight as a heartbeat. By the 4th year, I saw the shift. Ethan stopped visiting the floor. Meetings were about cost, deadlines, and delivery speed. When I asked him not to cut the heat endurance stage because we needed full samples, he raised an eyebrow. "We've done thousands of these. We know the limits." The limits change when you ignore them. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You'd make a terrible executive, Lily. You still believe numbers have morals. That sentence kept me quiet for 3 days. Not because it hurt, but because I feared he might be right. Maybe I was too rigid for this world. By the 5th year, Pierce hit record revenue. A new board member arrived. Young, ambitious, polished shoes, fluent in the language of optimization and strategy. In the December meeting, Ethan presented a plan called Lean 360. Shorter validation cycles, 20% faster output. I sat in the back row, my hands cold as I held the printout. He talked about smarter automation, risk tolerance, and streamlined validation. No one asked what streamlined meant. I knew. It meant cutting thermal endurance tests. After the meeting, I caught him in the hall. You're cutting the wrong corners. He smiled. No, Lily. I'm cutting the invisible ones. Nobody sees, nobody dies. I wanted to answer, but he walked away before I could speak. That line, nobody dies, echoed all night, colder than the wind scraping the factory windows. In the 6th year, I was assigned to oversee the Western Division. When I signed the papers, Ethan said, "We're promoting you unofficially. Title comes later." I believed him. I worked nights, fixed crises, trained new tech teams, thinking later would come. It never did. By the 7th year, I started to fade. Decisions went through without me. Files I edited were renamed, signed off by E. Pierce. The company newsletter showed his smiling photo beside the headline. Pierce Automotive achieves record output with reduced validation times. Underneath was his quote, "In manufacturing, conscience must adapt to efficiency." I read it over and over. Conscience must adapt. Years ago, he had called me the conscience of the factory. Now, conscience was just an inconvenience. I don't know the exact moment Pierce changed. Maybe when investors arrived, or when he realized reputation travels faster than ethics. All I knew was that I was still standing by the machines while everything else was being shortened. Every line, every second, every piece of trust. Sometimes, when the machines went silent, I stayed behind. The brake test chamber felt like a graveyard then. Dim lights, the soft ticking of cooling metal. I thought of my brother, the numbers, Ethan, and that line he once said, "You're the conscience of this factory." I smiled, tired. If he ever believed that, he wouldn't have tried to replace me with someone who only knew how to make prettier slides. I don't remember when I started to fall asleep. 7 years of loyalty, 7 years of believing that doing the right thing was enough for justice to understand itself. Turns out even justice needs a reminder. And I had just woken up. Lena arrived in mid-May. The same week dust storms started rolling through Assembly Line 3. She walked into the office in pearl heels, a light-colored dress, and a come-ready smile, the kind that softens the hard edges of steel around a production floor. Ethan introduced her to the team with a voice that almost sounded gentle. "This is Lena Morrison. She's here to observe how we do things." Observe. Not do, not learn, not train, just observe. Like a reporter on a backstage tour before a TV segment. I was assigned to show Lena around with no real description attached. Just help her get familiar with the process. In the first week, Lena was granted access to the internal system, a kind some technical supervisors still didn't have. She sat at the desk beside me and kept asking questions. Why do we test brakes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit? It never gets that hot in Toledo. Do we need dust condition testing? Modern cars have filters, right? A lot of these checks look the same. Can we bundle them to move faster? I had trained plenty of newcomers, engineers, and interns alike. None of them made me laugh and shiver at the same time the way Lena did. Not because she lacked knowledge, but because she didn't know she lacked it. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Someone like her should not be allowed to sign any technical report. Not yet. Maybe never. One late afternoon, I found Lena in the break room, standing at the coffee machine. She pressed a button and spoke like she was mid-podcast. "I'm thinking about a mini-series on women leaders in engineering. It could inspire younger girls." I stayed quiet. No pushback, no cheerleading. Only one silent question. Inspire them with what? The haha read PDFs or the Excel sheet with broken formulas. Thursday night, light rain. I went back to the office after hours because I'd left a USB drive with last month's validation logs. The third floor was empty, lit by dim motion sensors over gray tile. I walked past the CEO's office and stopped. The door was cracked. Lights on. Inside, I heard Ethan. And someone else. Joel Mencken, the CFO. Ethan was speaking. I told you she'll fall in line. Debt keeps her loyal. Lily's predictable. I froze with the USB still in my hand. Joel answered, lower and warier. You sure she won't raise flags? Please. She's been signing off on specs for years. If she speaks up now, she undermines her own record. I didn't move. Heat crawled up the back of my neck. Ethan kept going. Once Lena's signature is in the system, we'll cut the redundant tests. Move to 8 steps instead of 12. Break validation takes too long. Joel hesitated. That's cutting compliance by 33%. If NHTSA asks, we'll show them the new protocol. Controlled conditions. Same output. We saved millions in 18 months. A click sounded, the cap of a pen snapping open, like sealing a sentence. Lily's already done the hard part. All we need now is to ride that credibility and replace her with someone more flexible. I stood there in the hallway's dark and listened to them plan how to turn my professional reputation into a shield for systemic fraud. Neither of them knew I was there. Neither noticed that the door was not fully closed. Neither imagined the rigid engineer with too much debt had ears this sharp. I didn't record. I didn't take pictures. I just listened. And I will never forget a single word they used. I backed away quietly, steps soft as I could make them. No trace that I had been there. By the time I reached the front doors, the rain had thinned. On the concrete steps, water pooled into small mirrors, glowing dull yellow under the lights. I sat in my car for more than 10 minutes without starting the engine. Just sat. Silence. I replayed Ethan's voice. We'll ride on her credibility. Debt keeps her loyal. For 7 years, he had looked at me and seen one thing, a useful pawn held in place by money. I wasn't the factory's conscience. I was a legal screen for a coordinated cheat. The cold I felt didn't come from the air conditioning. It came from realizing that the person who thought she was guarding the standard had become the bridge others would use to break it. I drove home without a word. I plugged in the USB, opened the logs, and went through every edit. For the first time in years, my hand shook on the mouse. They had started altering data. Several temperature loss entries were changed to stable. Each of those lines carried my signature. No one knew. Only I knew. And that was the part that made it hard to breathe. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. I was at my desk at 6:40 in the morning, audit file open. I didn't tell anyone, didn't file an internal report. I started backing up every validation log from the last 3 years to an encrypted drive. I knew Ethan wouldn't stop. I knew Lena would soon gain signing authority. And I knew once she signed, everything I had built would be used to legitimize the game. Only one question remained. What would I do when it was my turn to be streamlined? Monday, week 8, since Lena began her so-called observation. I received an urgent meeting invite from internal communications. The email subject read, Strategic Realignment Kickoff. Don't miss this. I knew what it was, a ceremony. And I knew the reason I hadn't been told earlier wasn't oversight. It was an intention. 8 in the morning. The main auditorium, branded as the Pierce Vision Room, was more crowded than any internal meeting I'd seen before. The lighting was softer than usual. There were flowers, pastries, a table of paper cups printed with the new logo. Faster, smarter, safer, safer. That word, placed after faster and smarter, felt like an afterthought, a polite nod, not a priority. I walked in and sat in the third row, center. The air was heavy with office perfume and caramel coffee from the catering stand. Everything smelled like a freshly painted slogan covering cracks in belief. Ethan took the stage, mic clipped to his lapel, navy blazer, eyes bright, not a trace of fatigue. Beside him was Lena, dressed in a white blazer, tidy, more formal than usual. She moved slowly, carefully holding a bouquet of white calla lilies, the kind used for weddings or funerals. "Good morning, team," Ethan began, warm and confident enough to reach every ear in the room. "Today, we enter phase 2 of our modernization journey, and I couldn't be prouder to announce our new Regional Operations Director, Lena Morrison." Applause broke out. I clapped once, just once, enough to drown the slowing beat of my heart. Lena stepped to the center, smiling and bowing slightly. Her voice trembled but stayed clear. "I'm honored to serve the Pierce legacy. I may be new to automotive, but I believe in clarity, collaboration, and continuous improvement." I wondered, continuous improvement by cutting brake tests? Ethan gestured toward the screen behind them. A bold white phrase appeared in sans serif font. "Efficiency is our new safety." My hand tightened on my bag strap. No one reacted. A few people nodded as if they understood. But I knew. They only understood what they were allowed to. Next slide. Pierce, 2030. Lean, clean, and vision-driven. Next, validation optimization plan. Then I saw it, a small gray line tucked in the lower right corner of the fourth slide. Phase 2, reduced validation cycle. Small font, pale color, a tiny gear emoji beside it. No one read it, except me, and I knew exactly what it meant. Reduced validation wasn't a strategy, it was a burial. Of the 4 safety tests that mattered most: heat endurance under continuous load, dust exposure performance, friction at low pressure, long-term wear test on a 6% incline. 4 steps. I had once cried over when signing for the first time, knowing my brother died because one of those tests hadn't been done right. I sat there, hands folded, legs together, head slightly tilted like I was paying close attention, while my mind pulled away, colder, sharper. Ethan was talking about synergy between compliance and innovation, a cocktail of words everyone knew was fake, but still swallowed like complimentary wine. Lena smiled beside him. She didn't know the slide behind her contained a line that could take someone's child away. She only knew she was in the right place, under the right light, at the right moment. I looked around the room. Everyone was doing the easiest thing, clapping. Everyone was choosing the cheapest thing, silence. And I did one thing only. I clapped once, just to mark the end of illusion. After the ceremony, I slipped out quickly. No cake, no coffee, no congratulations. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the slide deck. I took a screenshot, marked the date, the time, the projector, and the room. Saved it to a private folder named Not For Today. That afternoon, Lena passed by my desk. "Did you think the presentation went well?" I looked up. "You spoke well, very confident, thank you." I was afraid I might say something wrong. I looked into her eyes. There was no deceit there. Just a young woman placed on a stage she didn't understand the wiring behind. That night, I stood alone in the third-floor hallway. The window overlooked the parking lot, the same spot where I once sat in my car and heard Ethan say, "Debt keeps her loyal." I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo of the slide. Phase 2, reduced validation cycle. Beneath it, I typed one line: "The moment I stopped being part of the system." I didn't cry, didn't rage, just silence. Like an engineer who's spotted the first hairline crack in a bridge and knows she's the only one who sees it before it collapses. At 9:47 in the morning, a message popped up on my screen. "Come see me. Now. Ethan." No subject, no greeting. But no surprise either. I grabbed the updated safety binder, walked down the glass corridor that connected engineering to the executive wing. 36 steps, gray stone tiles, glass on both sides overlooking the parking lot and the warehouse. The same view I'd stood by for 7 years, believing I belonged here. Now, each step echoed like a quiet alarm. Ethan was waiting. The glass door stood half open. Light from the window behind him stretched across the walnut desk, lined with precision. A widescreen monitor, a tray of coffee pods, and a neatly stacked set of color slides. He gestured for me not to sit. This wasn't a meeting, it was a verdict. You're being dramatic, Lily, he began, voice calm, almost conversational. These changes are strategic. I didn't sit, didn't flinch. I set the binder on his desk. They're dangerous. Ethan raised an eyebrow, smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when correcting a child. No one's died yet. The sentence chilled me, not because it was cruel, but because he meant it. I breathed slowly, pulled a sheet from the binder, the latest heat endurance report Lena had trimmed from 4 samples to 2. We had a heat fade reading at 362 degrees Fahrenheit. Below margin. You ignored it. It was a statistical outlier. I nodded slightly. So was my brother. The words hung in the room like metallic smoke. No one dared to stir them. Ethan crossed his arms, tilted his head. I'm not discounting your trauma, Lily, but companies evolve. We can't be held back by every personal ghost. I took out another document, a resignation letter, signed, dated, placed it gently on the desk, like setting a steel ball on glass, silent but heavy. What's this? My resignation. He lifted the paper as if it were an old punchline. You're quitting? Because of Lena? No. Because of me? Not even that. I met his eyes. Because this isn't the place I signed up to protect anymore. Ethan gave a dry laugh, folded the letter, not torn, not returned, just kept it, like a souvenir. You think integrity pays your mortgage? It paid for my peace. He frowned, then shifted tone. You walk out now, you burn bridges. You know that, right? No. I just refuse to walk deeper into the wrong building. He went quiet for a few seconds, then moved from behind the desk, circling like a man choosing his angle of attack. Without me, you're nothing but a compliance clerk. I turned my head slightly, my voice steady. Then you just misjudged the price of integrity. I started toward the door, but he wasn't done. You'll regret this, Lily. You've been here 7 years. You know how hard it is out there. It'll be hard, I said, hand on the glass handle. But at least it'll be honest. I stepped out. The door didn't slam, but it was loud enough for Ethan to know he no longer controlled me. The glass corridor was still 36 steps long, but this time, each one led me closer to freedom. Back at my desk, I opened my email and typed the subject line, Formal Resignation, effective in 14 days. I added, I will ensure proper handover of all safety documentation and critical reports. Thank you for the opportunity. Polite, professional, which made it sharper. Around noon, Lena stopped by my desk. Do you have 5 minutes? Not right now. I heard you're leaving? News travels fast. She stayed quiet. Her eyes no longer carried that camera-ready brightness. I didn't want it to end like this, she said softly. This is what choices look like, I replied. It's just a shame you weren't the one who got to make yours. You were chosen, to be used. That afternoon, I went to the brake test chamber. I stood alone in the metal room where every sound doubled, every echo lingered. I placed my hand on the old testing rig. They tried to cut its budget last year. I fought to keep it, because some things exist only to remind people where the limits are. That night, I took the safety binder home. For the first time in 7 years, I opened each page, reviewed every signature, including the ones I had been pressured to sign. Then I took a yellow Popo-it, pressed it to the front cover, and wrote, For whoever comes next, read with your conscience first. I didn't leave right away. That was the part Ethan didn't see coming. The next morning, I showed up at the plant as usual. Gray lab coat, badge around my neck, peppermint coffee in hand. No greetings, no questions. Only a few quick glances, the kind of silence shared by people who know but pretend not to. I powered on my computer and opened the validation dashboard. My name was still in the system. My access is still active, 14 days. Not to take revenge, just enough to return truth to the data. From that day on, every report I processed had 2 versions. One is stored on the internal server, the other stamped with NIST-certified timestamps and backed up to an encrypted personal drive under the same compliance backup clause Ethan himself had signed years ago. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was following the law down to the final period. When Lena asked, Why do we need separate backups? The system saves everything automatically. I smiled. The system saves what people want to remember. A backup saves what they want to forget. She didn't understand, just gave an awkward laugh. By the third day, rumors of my resignation had reached every corner of the building. A few people stopped by my desk, whispering, "Thank you for everything you've done." Another leaned closer. "They're going to erase your name from the audit files." I answered quietly, "They can erase words, not timestamps." No one knew what I meant, and I didn't need them to. On the fifth day, the K21 model, our premium brake line, failed its heat endurance test. Pressure loss at 372 degrees Fahrenheit. A full 5 minutes of system failure. The protocol required the entire line to be halted and reported to the NHTSA. Ethan didn't like the word halt. That afternoon, he called a quick virtual meeting. I joined. On the screen, his voice was low, metallic, and sure. "Bypass it. Audits next week. They'll never notice." Lena frowned slightly, her voice small. "But K21 is our flagship for next month's showcase. If this defect surfaces, then we'll call it a controlled deviation. Write a nice memo. I'll approve." I watched the reflection of the monitor in her young eyes. She nodded, too scared to disagree. Ethan turned to me. "You'll update the database, right, Lily?" "Of course," I said. "Everything will be documented." And I did exactly that. Documented everything. That night, I stayed late. The plant was empty, filled only with the hum of the vents and the distant click of warehouse robots. I reopened the internal meeting file, auto-recorded as a POIC vCall format. I renamed it E. Pierce Order K21 Bypass Audit Week .wave. No edits, no leaks, just a clean, legal backup. On the 8th day, Lena started to panic. Suppliers kept emailing. The test data didn't match. She pulled me into a small conference room. "Lily, I don't understand why the original reports differ from the client files. Do you have the time-stamped version?" "The what?" "The only version that can't be changed." I showed her a sample log, K21's heat test, with an international time authentication seal in the corner. She read it, looked up at me. "You mean someone altered the data?" I met her eyes but said nothing. Some lessons have to arrive through the sound of breaking steel inside your own mind. On the 10th day, Ethan sent an email to the entire executive team. All personnel must submit pending compliance documents before Friday. No exceptions. I submitted mine on time. Attached was a summary file with one final note. All validations have been archived, per company policy 4.2.1b. No one noticed the tiny code in parentheses, but I did. 4.2.1b. Allowed independent archival to a third-party server if the data involved public safety. That same day, a full record of every log went to the Department of Transportation's secure repository. No noise, no accusation, just responsibility. On the 12th day, Lena came to my desk near closing time. She sat down, her voice shaking. "Ethan's furious. He says someone leaked the validation data. They're tracing IPs. Are you scared?" I asked. "I don't even know what I did wrong." "Then learn this. Right and wrong don't live in emails. They live in signatures." She sat in silence for a long time, then whispered, "If I back out of K21, they'll know." That's okay. Silence is still a statement. The final night, I stayed alone. The technical room glowed amber against the polished steel floor. I opened the old binder. It was thicker now, each page a story someone tried to forget. I pressed a handwritten note on the cover in blue ink. "For whoever still believes safety isn't negotiable." I left it at the center of the table, right where the light from the window fell. Beside it, the cabinet key. My worn-out badge. No message for Ethan. None needed. Everything he had to face was already embedded in the data he signed himself. When I stepped out of the plant, it was 10:47 at night. The December air was cold and dry, carrying the scent of fuel and metal. I turned to look at the building where I'd spent 7 years, bright, polished, proud, unaware that inside, the truth was being boxed with falsified numbers. I drew a long breath. No anger, no hate, just lightness, like a machine finally freed from a jammed brake, and the car, at last, came to a stop. 2 months had passed since the night I left the safety binder on the table and walked out of Pierce Automotive. I never went back. No emails, no calls, just whispers scattered across LinkedIn. Pierce under review for audit discrepancies. No one tagged me, but I knew. The data had started to speak. I live in Detroit now, renting a small apartment near Midtown. White walls, windows facing the river. Each morning, I crossed the wooden bridge, drank peppermint coffee, and read industry news. One March morning, an email arrived from Nexus Mobility, the largest electric brake manufacturer in the Great Lakes region. Ms. Coleman, we've reviewed your work at Pierce. We'd like to meet you in person at the upcoming Automotive Safety Forum. I smiled, not out of pride, but irony. The conference was sponsored by Pierce. The morning of the event, Detroit was cold, the river wind heavy with salt and metal. The Beaumont Grand Hotel gleamed with its banner, Innovation Forward, Rethinking Safety Standards. I arrived early. No one recognized me. I had changed my hair, traded the gray engineer's uniform for a black blazer and a silk scarf. Wearing a badge that read Guest Consultant, I walked into the main hall. On stage stood Ethan Pierce, still confident, still composed, his voice steady, gestures sharp in rhythm with the slides. The first slide read in bold letters, Innovation thrives when we break old rules. Below it, the Pierce Automotive logo. And smaller text, sponsored by Pierce, leading the future of braking systems. I sat in the front row. When the lighting shifted, his eyes swept the room, then stopped. That moment froze for less than a second, but I saw it. The way his breath caught, then a sharp inhale as if whispering to himself, "It's fine." I smiled, not to taunt him, just the calm relief of someone who no longer carries fear. He went on with his speech. Words like efficiency, cost innovation, and smart testing frameworks filled the room. Behind him, the screen showed an image of brake calipers with the tagline New Validation Cycle, Faster, Smarter, Safer. I almost laughed. Safer, still last in line, still decorative. I listened quietly while a few people in the back whispered, "Isn't Pierce under audit?" I heard their K-21 line got flagged by NHTSA. Someone said whistleblower data triggered it. Ethan heard them. I saw the tiny twitch in his jaw. No one else would notice what I did, that moment when applause hides a man's shaking hands. The final slide read, Pierce, where safety meets innovation. Applause erupted. Ethan bowed, eyes carefully avoiding mine. But avoidance has a limit. As he stepped down, I stood and walked to the refreshment counter right along his path. He saw me, stopped. Not from fear, from uncertainty, because he didn't know what tone to use with the woman whose silence had fractured his empire. Lily. Ethan. My voice was even, almost polite. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, smiling tightly. "Same. You? Look, different. Peaceful?" I asked. Something like that. I glanced around. Reporters, investors, and NHTSA officials were gathered nearby, flipping through audit packets. One of them whispered something, and I said softly, "You should read your audit report. It's enlightening." Ethan blinked, forcing a smile. "You always had a flair for drama." "No, I just learned timing." I walked away before he could respond. Nothing unsettles a manipulator more than being denied the stage. That afternoon, the conference hosted a private networking session for senior executives. I was invited by David Rourke, CEO of Nexus Mobility, a man with a calm stride, a low voice, and a habit of looking people directly in the eye. "Ms. Coleman," he said, "I've read the audit summaries. You were the Director of Quality Compliance at Pierce, correct?" "Yes." "Up until 3 months before the investigation, did you know about the data manipulation?" "Let's say I knew what would happen if I stayed silent." He nodded slowly. "Good, because at Nexus, we're building systems to fix what companies like Pierce broke." He placed a thin envelope on the table. "We could use someone who remembers why rules exist." Inside was a formal offer. Director of Safety and Ethics, Nexus Mobility. Salary, twice what Pierce paid. Terms included independent authority over compliance reviews. I looked up. You realize that's not a very political position. That's exactly the point. We shook hands. His were warm, dry. That night, I stood outside the hotel, watching Nexus prototypes glide down the street. Their brakes sounded soft, precise, clean. I thought of my brother. If someone in that old testing room hadn't rushed a signature, he might still be alive. A cold gust swept through, carrying the scent of ozone and steel. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the sound of a car stopping didn't make me feel guilty. The next day, a small headline appeared in the business section. Pierce Automotive under federal investigation. Multiple executives step down. Amid data tampering allegations. Ethan's photo, pale, strained, sat beneath the caption, CEO denies wrongdoing, claims internal sabotage. I folded the paper, didn't smile, didn't pity, just grateful that the world still knows how to balance itself without anyone's permission. 3 days later, I went to Nexus to sign the contract. The new nameplate read, Lily Coleman, Director of Safety and Ethics. My office had a glass wall overlooking the factory floor. On my desk sat a small steel plaque engraved with the words, Integrity is not a department, it's a decision. I placed a cup of peppermint tea beside it. Inside the drawer, I kept a single copy of the old safety binder, the file that once broke a system and rebuilt me. I didn't need recognition or revenge, just the quiet certainty that this time I was allowed to do it right. 3 months later, I was in a meeting with the validation team at Nexus when my phone started buzzing nonstop. A stream of alerts lit up the screen. Breaking news: Pierce Automotive under federal investigation for falsified safety reports. I set my pen down. No need to open it. The headline said enough. Everything I had predicted was now fact. The local news showed footage of the Pierce factory gates sealed shut, the silver logo gleaming under Detroit's gray sky. Across it, a banner read, Federal Investigation Ongoing, a clean cut between past and present. Ethan was below, shielding his eyes from camera flashes as he walked out of the building. His face hollowed. Nothing was left of the man who once stood on stage radiating confidence. Behind him was Lena, no white dress, no smile, just a young woman with red, swollen eyes. The anchor read, CEO Ethan Pierce was taken into federal custody this morning for obstruction and data falsification related to the Model K21 series. Director Lena Morrison has formally resigned. The board has suspended all operations pending audit results. I turned off the TV. I didn't need to watch more. An hour later, my Nexus inbox filled with more than 10 emails from old coworkers, engineers, supervisors, even warehouse inspectors. Each subject line read the same thing. Thank you. One message said, To Lily, we remember who kept us safe. Short. No emojis. Didn't need any. I read it twice, then sat still for a long while. Not proud, not triumphant. Just a quiet ease, like after a long surgery when the patient finally pulls through. A week later, the Department of Transportation released its preliminary report to the public. The first page quoted the line everyone repeated. Anonymous safety backup file, L. Coleman, triggered an investigation into the K21 validation records. Time-stamped data sets revealed temperature manipulations and test bypass directives from executive management. Anonymous. I smiled when I saw they kept that word. Even though everyone knew, nothing is truly anonymous when the signature of conscience is that familiar. That night, I drove past the old plant. The gates were sealed. The assembly lines are dark. The faded billboard still hung above the entrance. Faster, smarter, safer. Paint peeling, swaying in the wind. I stopped by the curb but didn't get out. Just looked through the windshield at the building that had once been my entire world. Now it looked like a giant shipwreck, stripped and silent. I didn't want to remember Ethan as a villain. He was just a man who lost the line between innovation and integrity, and when he lost that line, he lost direction entirely. Lena had left the company, Reports said she was cooperating with investigators, turning over internal emails and meeting notes. A local broadcast showed her leaving headquarters, carrying a small bag. No guards, no microphones waiting. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. But when I saw her walking past the police, tape, head down, I only felt sad. She was another casualty, a young leader turned into a poster child, then discarded when the lights went out. A week later, I received an envelope with no sender. Inside was a single handwritten note. I finally understand why you checked every line twice. I'm sorry. L. I folded it and placed it in my drawer. No reply. No need. That apology wasn't for me, it was for herself. At Nexus, I launched a new program called Open Integrity, a platform that lets any engineer report technical violations directly to an independent safety board. No managerial filter, no interference. At the first meeting, a young engineer asked, "Why call it integrity?" Sounds heavy, I smiled. Because if we don't call it heavy, someone else will make it light. The room went quiet. Then people nodded. They understood. A month later, headlines broke again. Pierce Automotive files for bankruptcy. CEO Ethan Pierce faces up to 12 years for falsification of federal safety data. The final photo of Ethan showed him in court, hands cuffed, eyes downcast. One frame caught him glancing up toward the spectator rows where I wasn't sitting. I didn't need to see him punished. Justice doesn't need an audience. That night, I came home late. Opened the window. The Detroit wind swept across my desk. Streetlights glinted off the steel cover of the old safety binder still tucked in my drawer. I took it out, opened the first page. The yellow post-it was still there. For whoever still believes safety isn't negotiable. I added a new line beneath it. Sometimes truth just needs time to load. I sat in silence. No anger, no fear. Only the familiar sound of the city, the soft hiss of electric cars stopping, the wind through metal beams, the faint scent of peppermint from the cold cup beside me. I wondered if Ethan ever realized what he had truly lost. Not the company, not his title, but the right to believe in himself. Justice came, without my summons. Like good brakes, it made no noise. It just stopped at the right moment. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. It wasn't revenge, it was conscience, finally catching up. 1 year to the day since Ethan was sentenced, Lena disappeared from the public eye, and Pierce Automotive officially collapsed. I was still at Nexus. Our validation lab had been upgraded with a fully automated inertia measurement system. No more hand-recorded data like back at Pierce. Each time the brake assembly hit the 1500 RPM rotor, the metal screech sounded like a heartbeat pounding inside a rib cage. No one spoke in that moment. Everyone just listened. Listened to know whether the system was warning us or releasing a sigh of safety. On the wall hung a plaque that never changed. Integrity is a form of engineering. Every time I looked at it, I saw an old reflection. A 30-year-old woman clutching binders through a night shift, drinking burnt coffee, whispering to herself, "Just get through this week. Just keep your job." But nothing okay ever comes from tolerating what's wrong. One Wednesday morning, a thin brown envelope sat on my desk. No sender, no logo. Inside was a small card, white paper, handwriting slightly tilted as if someone had just relearned how to write by hand. This time, I'll earn it. L. No need for a full signature. I knew who it was. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, like a quiet confession, not asking forgiveness, just permission to start right. I smiled, took a sip of peppermint tea, not a trace of bitterness in my throat. I later heard Lena was working for a nonprofit in South Texas, training small manufacturers on safety compliance. She'd applied on merit. No backdoor, no speeches, no microphones. Just a fresh start from the first question on the written test. Explain the importance of thermal validation. I saw her once more by chance at an ISO standards conference. She passed me at the coffee counter. Our eyes met for just a few seconds. She nodded. I nodded back. No hugs, no tears. No, Lily, I'm sorry. We didn't need that. People who take responsibility through action don't owe apologies in words. At Nexus, I kept expanding the Open Integrity program. Now, even interns could file anonymous risk reports directly to the Independent Compliance Board. We built the system so no one would ever lose their job for telling the truth. I hired a team of young engineers. 3 of them had once been rejected by Pierce for not being team material. Now they were the backbone of our dynamics division. One of them, Malik, once asked, "What kept you going when they ignored your warnings?" I looked at him. The memory of one crash that didn't have to happen. I still lived in the small apartment near Midtown. On weekends, I went to the library, read books on philosophy and systems design. I wasn't in love with anyone, didn't need to be. I was already full, with the one thing I'd always lacked: peace after every signature. One late afternoon, I closed the validation file for the K-35 Mountain series and turned toward the window. Light rain fell over Detroit, droplets clinging to the glass like heat test readings. I whispered to myself, as if writing the final line of a long story, finally finding its ending. Sometimes the loudest revenge is doing the job right. I folded the file, not quickly, not slowly, set it on the desk beside Lena's card. No one needs to be destroyed. No one needs to kneel. I don't need them to confess. I don't need them to pay. I just need to know. No one will die because of one dishonest signature again. And I no longer live just to endure. If you've listened all the way to this point, maybe you believe it too. That kindness and integrity never go out of style. If you've ever been dismissed for doing the right thing, or stayed silent just to stay dignified, you're not alone. Subscribe for more quiet victories, stories where justice doesn't shout, it stands firm. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is simply doing your job flawlessly.